The measure of faith is a, a phrase that used to be in use in this country, but it kind of fell out of use. And like many phrases that we used to use, they don't get used in that anymore. And now I'm old enough that I can think of phrases that were very much in use when I was a kid. And if you say that to young people today, they have no idea what you're talking about. And, back in the old days when someone could dance, you could say they really cut a rug. That doesn't mean a thing to young people today. They have a whole different picture in their head. And my whole point is to say, this is a phrase that used to be utilized, and now it has fallen out of use, and so we're not familiar with it. But let me just show you what this is about. And it comes in a couple of pieces. So here's the first one. The measure of faith. The first thing about the measure of faith is it is taking personal responsibility for a task. When someone gives you the measure of faith, they are asking you to take personal responsibility for a task. There's another part to this, and that's not, now this can be used in the secular realm. In fact, that's the way this was used most of the time. But now let me give you this next one, and before I give you this, I think I have a kind of a definition here. The measure of faith is trusting someone to perform an assigned task with fidelity. What do I mean with fidelity? Okay? What else? Do you remember, he said completion, to do it completely. Remember when records were, everybody had a record player, and someone came out with a deal and they said high fidelity. What was fidelity? Okay. And what was it describing about that sound? High fidelity. Yeah, okay, Eric says the truest sound. It was a sound that was faithful to the original recording, or as close as you could get to the original. So when someone sang, if you recorded that in high fidelity, it means when you listened to the recording, it sounded just like what. So fidelity is faithfulness. So the measure of faith is trusting someone to perform an assigned task that is faithful to what the one who assigned the task wanted done. In other words, let's use component parts here. Richard was right, that they would complete the task. And they not only complete it, but when they were doing it, they would do it the way that the one who assigned it wanted it done. And if they did that, if they were faithful to do all of that, then they did that with fidelity. Okay, now let me give you the second part of this. It is personal responsibility for a task. And what is the task? The general heading here, the general heading is to labor with God. God has given to who? The measure of faith. Every saint has been given the measure of faith, which means every saint is being assigned a task for them to be personally responsible to discharge with fidelity or faithfulness to how that task should be done. When God gives us a measure of faith individually, He is counting on us to labor with Him and to do it in a way that is pleasing to Him without Him looking over our shoulder. It's up to us. That's why it's personal responsibility. God is not going to come along and say, hey, did you do that? Did you do that? Are you doing that? How's that going? He's not doing that. He's letting you know that every single one of us have a personal responsibility to labor with Him in some way. And once we know that, there's two things. First thing is we have to say, how am I going to labor with God? Okay? Because that's what you're designed to do. And by the way, this is easier than you think. I don't want you to be frightened of this. So listen carefully. I know, because I know the people in this room, I know that there are things that you are doing and have been doing for years that qualify to have you laboring with God. The difference is we just didn't understand that's what that was. We didn't see it for what it was supposed to be. I'm trying to encourage you a little bit by saying you're not going to have to change anything except understanding why you're doing what you're doing. And once the motive comes, here it comes, out of the doctrine, guess what? It becomes godly labor. That's what your Father is after. And so all of that phrase is actually looking at all of that. When you look at those words, according as God has dealt to every man the measure of faith, we understand two things about that. Number one, I understand God has dealt to me a measure of faith. I am now charged with the responsibility to labor with Him in some way. But I also understand from that God has charged everyone else in this assembly with the same measure of faith. No, that doesn't mean they have to do what I do, because there's more than one way to labor with God. But when you look at it and decide how you labor with God, and like I said, many of you already do it. Folks on the Zoom thing, you are already laboring with God in ways that when we get into this in verse 6, you're going to realize, man, this is what I'm doing. I just need to see it for what it is and now think about it that way. That's in a godly way. Exactly right. So this is kind of already being done. But me knowing that God has dealt the measure of faith to everyone else is supposed to now begin changing the way I think about you. So I look at you now and I think, you know what? I like this person because of this, or I like this person because of that, or that's just the way you grow up in the world. But now I'm going to start looking at you. When I say I'm going to start looking at you, this is how I now look at you. But you're going to begin to look at each other by this, and so I need to be. I need to just explain this little part. In the beginning, even though you're going to understand what I'm saying to you, you will not get the full impact of what it means for God to have dealt to everyone the measure of faith. It can't sink in fully yet. You're only going to be able to appreciate the tip of the iceberg of it. But God has to generate that in you somewhere. And so this is where it gets started. What will happen for you is you'll get a little further down the road, and you'll get over into Romans 13 and Romans 14 and Romans 15. And when you come back and revisit 12:3, that is suddenly now going to mean so much more to you than it ever meant when you first saw it. And do you know why it will? Because now you'll be looking at it with a more mature eyes, so to speak. This is not about God has given this person this much faith and given that person another amount of faith. That's not what this is. Because it's not, according as God had dealt to every man a measure of faith. If he said a measure, then you know what? He might give someone else a different measure than another. But he has dealt to every man the measure. Which, guess what? It's all the same. Isn't that how God is dealing with us under grace? What he does for one saint, he does for every saint. It's not different. Richard isn't a whole lot justified, and I just get a little bit justified. We get the same exact justification. We get the same exact sanctification. We have the same access to God. We have the same adoption. You know, Barbara doesn't get to be more adopted than me and Richard. We're all the same adopted. And when he gives everyone the measure of faith, he is giving everybody the same personal responsibility to labor with him. So there we are. So don't think of that word faith in the sense of God is giving me faith to believe something. That phrase is faith in the sense, in your notes, I talk about it. I just don't have time to do it in the video session.